Hello, hello. Welcome, friends and enemies, heroes and villains, to Epic Realms Presents a Gamemasters Workshop. Our guests today are some amazing guests. Our first guest is Richard Lee Byers. He's written many novels, including D&D and the current Marvel Asgardian series. Welcome, Richard Lee Byers, to the Gamemasters Workshop.
Thank you very much.
Next to him is Andrew Valkauskas. You might know him from Fate of the Norns. They just did their Kickstarter for the Ultimate Viking Anthology that they are in the process of delivering on. Welcome, Andrew. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I'm gonna try to hold up for the whole episode.
All right.
Fighting a flu.
We'll cross our fingers for you. Good vibes your way. And last but certainly not least, he's the RPG line director for Samurai Sheepdog. They got all kinds of products going out there. Also have an amazing Patreon. His name is Kevin Glusing. Kevin, did I get your last name right this time?
You did. Thank
Yes,
you very much.
I nailed it. Oh, second time's the charm.
Also, hello, everybody.
Hello. So welcome to the show, guys. We appreciate you being here. All the people that are watching at home or wherever, if they're on their phone or whatever. What we do for the Gamemasters Workshop is we have some preset topics that we'll talk about, but we also will answer your questions. If you have questions, if you're a future GM and you don't know where to start, if you're an existing GM but you're new and you don't really know what to do, or if you're an experienced GM and you're coming here for little tips and pointers and things that you might not have thought of, because everybody's a little bit different, every GM is a little bit different, and these pros here are with me to help you make your game better and improve role-playing in general for everybody. So that is our goal. I do want to start off by saying all of these guys have extensive backgrounds in role-playing, whether, as we mentioned, Richard writing D&D novels and role-playing, and obviously there's a whole background there and world building and things like that. Andrew runs a company that designs RPGs, Fate of the Norns, Viking role-playing system. And Kevin Glusing, obviously, third-party publisher for... You're doing 5th edition stuff now, right, over there?
So we do Pathfinder 1st edition, 2nd edition, and D&D 5th edition.
Yes, so all kinds of stuff.
Just in the last year, I've started doing a little bit more of Starfinder because we've had a few requests come through our Patreon.
Okay, awesome. So very experienced, as you guys can see. And I kind of wanted to gear some of the preset stuff kind of to like the world building, the custom design, because you guys, have a lot to do with the creativity of role playing in a broader spectrum. I don't want to say that this is just D&D, because role playing is so much bigger than just D&D, but a lot of people's experiences with that, and I think the knowledge of what the role playing is can be used across multiple different gaming systems, regardless of what it is. So with that being said, and I'd like to start off with Richard. If we're talking about a way of world building in a non-daunting, a new player or a newer player trying to put together a world, or maybe take their idea and fit it into a pre-existing world, what are some ways of doing that in a way that doesn't seem overwhelming and too hard to do, in your opinion?
Well, I think that if you are doing a setting from the ground up, it's important, and particularly if you're new at GM, it's important to know that you don't have to work out every detail of everything right from the start. That you can have this big world out there, and you kind of know some of the broad strokes of it, but your first campaign or adventures or whatever could be set in like little archipelago of islands, or on a little peninsula sticking out from it, or if you're going to an established world, like a corner of the map where there isn't much written about it, and you can kind of make up your own stuff. And once you start building a little bit like that, then you'll gain confidence, and you can, as you go, you can add more and more information as it becomes appropriate to what your player characters are actually doing.
Andrew, how about you? Your thoughts on non-daunting world building tasks or incorporating it into pre-existing worlds?
I think most adventures are going to start somewhere small. I mean, it's going to be a party starting somewhere in a corner of a world. And that's really what is relevant to those players, right? You don't need to think about a pantheon of gods, countries, and international struggles between kingdoms. It's really what's the party's adventure all about? What's the little environment? What's the town? Start small. Where's the adventure going to begin? Where are they going to go? Who are they going to meet? What are the adventure hooks? Where are they going to take them, the players? And then go from there. Look around those corners. Don't think too far ahead, and flesh out the small areas first. And then, what's across the river? What's the next town over? What's in the catacombs in the hills to the north, if the players want to go off the beaten path? You don't need to get into the vast complexities of your world right away. Build small, and let the players ask the questions and help flesh that out. That's usually how most of my worlds ended up evolving over time. It's returning to these places and having players, stomp through these places again and ask more questions. And those places just got more and more familiar, and more of those questions got answered. More of these little rough edges got refined, and the place got a little bit more familiar, and the scope just grew and grew gradually. So take your time with it, enjoy it, smell the roses as you're going through that adventure. I think it's a journey. It's not a destination.
Evan.
Nice. Yeah, I really like those. Those methods are really good, and that's actually a lot of what I incorporate myself. I think if I was to add anything, one of the things I like to do, especially if it's whether it's a canon or a non-canon world, right? Like if it's already pre-established, like the Forgotten Realms, or maybe a homebrew world that we're running or something. I like to know things like what absolutely has to exist here, right? So like, what is the setting like? What's the area like that we're in? What kind of things would you expect to absolutely need to be there? Also, what kind of things do you absolutely not want there? So for example, you might not want certain types of animals because of the area in there in the region and stuff like that. But then I like to twist that and say, okay, so how do we make those things, how do we turn them on their head? Right? So like, oh, this absolutely has to be in the setting. Well, what if it wasn't? And what would that do to change the area that they're in, right? And so from a world building aspect, if you do that, that gives you, and especially as a newer player, it gives you questions that you can answer before you even really kind of start to play the game with the group, right? So I think an example I have is one of the games that we played in Forgotten Realms, as I had mentioned back in D&D 3.5. We started in Waterdeep, and the question that everyone was posed with by our GM at the time was, what if one of the Lords of Waterdeep went missing? We don't know who they are. There's like one Lord of Waterdeep that everyone knows, and but we do know from the whispers and everything that somebody disappeared, and so we have to find them without actually knowing who they are. And then there's that bit of world building to kind of learn those bits of news and everything as you go.
Yeah. Well, and world building doesn't, we talked about the pre-existing worlds. World building isn't always just something you create, because again, unless you've got a living city where every single city block is all mapped out with every character in it, you're not going to get, you can look at Waterdeep and there are tons of buildings and tons of places to go. So it may be a pre-existing world, but you still have to do world building as well. Do you guys take notes when you're GMing, especially if you're starting a new game? Do you take notes about things that the players say, or things that might come up that you can use later, or you think of a character idea that doesn't necessarily fit in here, but you might want to fit it in down the road? And we'll go backwards. Kevin, do you ever come up with that? Do you like have a notebook as a GM and you kind of keep track as you're role playing?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, no, I absolutely keep notes and stuff. Somebody will just with interactions that they have with certain characters, I'll make note, of, well, they seem to really interested in this particular character that they interacted with. So we're going to make a note and have that character pop back up later down the road. And maybe even that will help to kind of establish further things in the world building, so that, oh yeah, you guys met the blacksmith, and our paladin really hit it off with him because they have ranks in crafting and they really wanted to learn to be a better blacksmith. Well, as part of their investigation, they find out that they can go talk to his sister that's 2 blocks down the road, owns the bakery, stuff like that.
Right. Andrew, how about you? Do you take notes as a GM? Or do you kind of
when I
try and
was-
store it in your brain?
When I was younger, it was all in the brain. Now, as I'm getting older and older, I take more and more notes. I tell you that much. I don't remember as much. So there's always a notepad or a little Surface Pro on the table for sure. And the larger the world gets, the harder it is to keep track of everything, and that's inevitable. So when we started out with Fate of the Norns universe back in the early 90s, it was something that you can kind of just wrap your head around very easily. 10 years later, we had a binder full of world lore. 20 years
Nice.
later, we're looking at almost like a Wikipedia intranet that we had kind of built ourselves in terms of just interactions between kingdoms, magical items, people, places, plot lines, all of that stuff. 30 years on, I mean, it's just a series of books at this point. Like, we've committed it to world canon at this point in print.
Right.
But as time goes on, that's just the natural evolution of the interconnectedness of your world. Is it will get more and more complex. It will get more and more unruly. And if you are one individual that starts out this project, it'll eventually get beyond you if it's successful. It will become a project with more and more people collaborating and helping you out, and it'll become more than just your baby, right? It'll be something you'll have to eventually let go and let the community grow with you. And that's a sure sign of success, that people fell in love with your world, fell in love with your creation, and that's a good thing. And sometimes it's hard to let go. Sometimes it's hard to let someone else take the reins. But in the end, if you've got the right creative people, and if you've got the right vision and direction that you give writers and other creators, you get something beautiful at the very end of this. And it's an ongoing process.
Right. Richard.
So you meant,
Oh, go ahead.
oh,
Kevin.
I'm sorry, I just had a question for Andrew. You mentioned having established kind of your own your like an internal wiki kind of thing. Do you have maybe a public facing wiki that includes a lot of that information?
No, so this is something we developed before there were any tools. So we were IT guys way back in the day. So we
Sure.
actually developed an internal tool that we had programmed ourselves. So this is something that we just run off of our PCs and would actually sync data files. So we would end up like exchanging network keys, and this stuff would just be sent in terms of data updates with a database, Postgres database.
Okay.
So this is something that's like obsolete now. Definitely there are like free tools that are infinitely better than what we
Right.
came up with 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So, for all the creators out there, there are free tools definitely that allow you to manage your world. But if you need it, there's always ways to get it done. I mean, there's tools out there. I mean, programmers out there like on Fiverr and other places where you can hire people to create custom tools for whatever your needs are, right? So if you need something, if your specialty is world building, but you need a tool, an automation tool for something, there are people that are out there that can help you out. It's not a solo endeavor anymore.
Nice. Thank you.
Richard, do you take notes as a GM?
I don't. I know that I probably should. But I just try to keep it all in my head. One thing that helps me quite a bit actually when I GM is that I tend to use some canned adventures and then modify them and figure out how they fit together into a fundamental world that I'm designing,
Yeah.
or fundamental campaign I'm designing. So a lot of the information that these guys would put in their notes if they're building a world from scratch, I can say, oh, what was that? That was in the second module, right? Let me go back and look at that.
Yeah. And that's a great point to make, is that you don't have to build your world from scratch. If you can use a module, you can use a pre-made book or even an adventure and just plop it right into your homebrew world or your even a pre-existing world. You could grab an adventure pack that's set in, say, Oberon, and sit down like, okay, well, I can use XYZ here in my game, regardless of whether we're talking, a like a Mutants and Masterminds campaign, or if you were talking to, a Pathfinder game. If you're in Galarian or Forgotten Realms, you can still insert the pack and just kind of take what you need from it, and build off of that. So that's a great point to make, that you don't have to world build as much. You can take others because it's your game, right, guys?
Yeah.
Like you can
Absolutely
do what you want with it because you're the one running the show, especially if it works for your players.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I also, as a novelist, I have kind of an ugly, selfish feeling that like I should really get paid if I make up too much stuff.
Right.
Well, in Kickstarter, there's so many brilliant minds that are coming up with amazing settings, amazing materials, and it's just all kinds of new systems, right? And you can't learn all these new systems, but you can definitely, that's a great point, utilize the setting material for whatever system you are running.
Somebody go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, to Andrew's point, one of the things I like to do, that I like to do with my Patreon, is to take projects like that you mentioned, where they have their world that they build, but then they set it in their own kind of an RPG system or something. And I've worked with a few over the last couple of years to actually kind of do conversions over to like Pathfinder and D&D and stuff, so that they can kind of have that segue, right? They have their own setting and their own RPG system, but then to kind of help recoup the sales a bit, bring in something more established like D&D or whatever. Yeah.
We do have a question in chat for you guys.
Sure.
And whoever wants to speak up first can feel free. Do you front load your world building, i.e. do you come up with your world long in advance and make all your notes and stuff ahead of time, or do you kind of build it as you go and as you're playing?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have like some broad strokes of what this world fundamentally is, and then a more detailed, notes or version of, the city where we're starting out, or the first dungeon they're going to explore, or whatever that might be.
Yeah,
Or
the
first
broad
investigation they're going to undertake.
Right.
Agreed. You probably have your broad strokes in terms of what your universe's sandbox is going to be like, but you're going to be reactionary to your players in terms of their specific questions. You can't plan for all of the little minutia for
Right.
sure. You're going to have to fly by the seat of your pants most of the time, and that's the dark art of Gamemaster.
Yes. Yeah, I've done both, and they're different ways and perspectives. Honestly, it's a lot like it's kind of like top down versus bottom up design, right? So if you're going to front load all of your information, that's more of a bottom up way of doing things, because you're going to take and you're going to build and establish all of these details about things beforehand, and then just that way you have the answers in front of you when somebody comes up and interacts with something, versus the other way, where you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants, and you establish these things as you go, and then you're like, oh yeah, and you make a note of it for the world for down the line, and you're like, okay, so we'll add that in later.
Do you guys prefer the being prepped, or do you prefer like the improv, the seat of your pants improv of characters? How about you, Richard?
Of characters specifically?
Just when you're running, do you prefer to like, be super well prepped, or do you prefer like the improv of it and the?
I like. Well, I mean, I like to have certainly know basically what the story problem is,
Mhm.
and kind of what genre we're in, and what are the major obstacles in front of the characters. I like to have all that, but as far as what they do in the story, I mean, if they do something weird and unexpected, they go with it. As long as everybody's having fun. The only time that I will really put on the brakes, I think, is when seems like they're just going off on an absolute tangent that will go nowhere and just wind up wasting time and bore the crap out of everybody. At that point, I will kind of say, no, you really want to go this way. But other than that, sure, improv. Let's see what happens.
Andrew?
Improv all the way, the older I get, just from experience. I run demo games all the time at conventions. I will sit down with 6 people I don't know, and it'll be roll the wheel and roll the dice and weird the runes every single 4 hours. Every 4 hours is a whole new table of wacky characters, and it's just a wild ride, and it's always an unpredictable ride. I will run the same adventure 6 times in a row with 36 different people, and it will run 6 different times for the 6 different slots. And I can tell you there was one group that took me on a 180-degree turn on my adventure after my 2-minute intro text. So basically my little 2-minute introduction, like, this is the setting of your adventure. They basically spun me around back into my flavor text. And the next 4 hours were back into my flavor text. They did not move forward. They decided the flavor text that I laid down as the intro was way more interesting. They wanted to go back into that. And I said, sure, let's go. Like, it was just pedal to the metal. Let's go.
That's hilarious.
Awesome.
All right. So we'll get back to the seat of the pants and flying, improv stuff a little bit down the road here. We've got another question that kind of deals with that we'll talk about on a little bit different of a spin. But the next question on my list, and people in the live stream can go ahead and ask any questions that they want whenever they want, and we'll try and get to them as they come in. How experienced do you think someone should be before they start making up their own rules, or start making up their own monsters, or start making up their own homebrew, stuff? I know, Kevin, you deal with a lot of, custom making stuff. So we'll start with you on that. With your Patreon, you do a lot of stuff with that. How experienced should a GM be before they start getting into that kind of stuff?
Well, okay. So part of me wants to say, wait until you're at least comfortable with how your rule set is and what you want to do to play the game. But I'd be remiss if I didn't admit that I've basically been coming up with things on the fly since day one.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been playing D&D for 20 years now. And I've actually been designing for just about as long. Pretty much from the 3rd session of D&D that I ever played, they had me GMing, and we put together characters with savage species and just went off from there. And I learned the rules as we went. And it was fun. It was absolutely wonderful. So I think a lot of the answer to the question itself comes down to what kind of person are you. If you're the kind of person who likes to do like me and just tinker with literally everything, then it's great to just start doing it and see where it falls. You might not understand the grappling rules, so running a hydra and or a giant octopus or something is gonna be hard for you, but at the same time, it's going to be a lot of fun to just be like, oh yeah, so let's see, we'll roll the die. Yeah, it grabs you.
Grappling rules,
right?
Andrew?
Oh God, the grappling rules. I just had
Twitch.
come back. Yeah, the grappling rules. Yeah, so there are no hard and fast rules. I mean, it really depends on the system. You could be playing a completely very flavorful narrative system that doesn't, like, the rules fit on a cue card, right? Like 2-page rules, and you can start grokking the rules like the same day you pick up the rule book, right? I mean, it can be light and fluffy rules, or you could be playing like Shadowrun, the latest version. And all of a sudden, you're like constantly looking through the rules, trying to get the latest, like, nuanced. What's the exception to this rule, and it also depends on the person, right? Some people are, wrapping their heads around the numbers and the rules takes a while. They could be playing for 10 years and it's just not their bag. And some people, that comes naturally to them. But the way you learn is through mistakes, through trial and error. And I like Kevin's answer. It's like, get your hands dirty, go right into it and start trying it out. and you're going to fall down, and you're going to make mistakes. Things are going to be broken. Things are going to be, you know, too easy, too hard. But that's where you calibrate. That's where you learn. Experience comes from making mistakes and learning from your mistakes. So, you know, get to it. That's it. That's my answer.
All right, Richard, your thoughts?
I generally agree with that. I think maybe if you want to be a little more cautious, you should hold off until you have enough of a sense of the system to
Mhm.
know how powerful the thing you're creating really is. You know,
Right.
some
Yeah.
general sense of it. I mean, it's great to create a you know, like a insanely powerful monster, but you should know it's an insanely powerful monster and then unleash it on your first level party.
Right.
And it's great to create an insanely powerful staff of spell storing or something, but you know, don't give it your first level party and have them use it to go around, you know, killing kobolds. You know,
Right.
it's just nice to know the system well enough to have a general sense of when it's appropriate to introduce a particular monster or a particular magic item or spell or
Mhm.
whatever it might be. And again, you're still going to make mistakes, just like Andrew said. If you're a little bit cautious, maybe that'll keep you from breaking your game.
I think one of the things that helps a lot, and this is one of those where you kind of see arguments online a lot about rules lawyers and stuff. If you don't have as well of a grasp on the rules, but they're putting you in charge of them, fall back on that person. You know, they might be a rules lawyer, but they're going to also have those answers for you at the drop of a hat that you can use and help to build the group. You know,
Mhm.
thankfully I had 3 or 4 guys that were all very familiar with D&D 3.0 whenever we started playing, and so they kind of helped me along, and I didn't have to worry too much about being overpowered, you know, in addition to the rules themselves having kind of their own established merit system with the CR challenge rating and stuff. But you know, a
Yeah.
lot of times you want to make sure that you're using those people to your advantage in your games and being like, so I don't know the grapple rules, so if somebody wants to explain them, or we could just do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, rely on the people at the table that have the experience. It's a good point, Kevin. And also, some of the RPG systems out there actually have guidelines. The designers will go to the trouble to write guidelines in terms of creating your own content. They will actually peel back their designer diary and show you the secret sauce that they used for designing spells, magical items, monsters, and things like that. And you know, utilize that to your advantage, obviously. So those RPGs are definitely going to make things easier for you.
A lot of people come in when they start, you know, not because this isn't always just about new GMs, because sometimes you'll be a new GM, but if you're a new GM, sometimes you're like, hey, I want to start role playing, but you know, we've talked before on the show, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to get players. So a lot of times they'll bring in their friends that also don't know a lot of stuff. And so a new player often will be like, well, they don't know the rules. So they're like, I want to make this. And the new GM doesn't really see how to make that person's idea work. So do you guys fall into the category of like, well, we'll just make something up to kind of fit that player's thing, or do you find something that exists that's as close as you can get and try and build it based around that? You know, we're talking about home brewing stuff, and oftentimes, like I said, people come in and they want to build something ridiculous, or they want to build something that's not really lining up. Do you think a new GM should just make something up for them, or try and reel them in a little bit? Well,
I think.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to call on you.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I think again, it really comes down to comfort level, right? So even if you're new at doing this, right, there's still going to be a level of comfort that got you to the point where you're like, yeah, I could run a game, and then that's where you kind of establish your boundaries. You tell your friends, you know, hey, we're all new at this. I don't think I can let you build Vash the Stampede in our game because he's gonna need a lot of guns, and this is D&D, and we don't really have those without special rules,
Right.
you know, things like that. In addition to all the other things he has going on for him. you know, again, if you're comfortable with it and you're willing to kind of, you and them have the established connection between you that you agree, if this feels like it's getting too powerful, we're going to tone it down a little bit. You know, maybe you go through a combat and they completely wipe the board with the enemies, and you're like, all right, guys, let's tone that down a little bit for next time, and we'll say that, you know, there was some mitigating circumstances, and we'll go from there, you know. But that said, once you get to the point where you're like really comfortable with letting people do things, like I personally tend to just not even say no anymore when somebody says something, and I roll with it, you know. And a lot of that comes from building. I myself have built a lot of those rules now in our own games, and even published through our different source books and stuff. Various, sometimes completely wild things that still fit within the rules themselves.
Richard, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in my experience, if somebody wants to come in and do something that I'm wary of, it's because we're starting, you know, kind of, you know, modest, low-level characters, and they want a character that's very powerful right away. So I would probably not let them build the character that they have in mind exactly as they're thinking about it, but I would say this is the path that your character could take to grow into being that character at a higher level.
Right. Yeah, so try kind of be like, that's not really possible now, but down the road,
That's
you
right. You
can
can't
get there.
start out as Wolverine, but you know.
Right. That's
You
a
can
great
get there.
example.
Yeah, no instant gratification. This is your journey.
Right. You got to earn it. Somebody asked a question, and do you guys have kids? And if so, how young is too young to get them started role playing or GMing?
Well, depends on the kids, I think. I've got two young ones. I've got 15 and 12, and they started when they were what? I think as early as 7 or 8 when we were test playing Vanguard. So we designed a collaborative storytelling game where everyone gets to be a GM for a chapter of the story. And
Oh, that sounds cool.
the system uses one mechanic to resolve everything. So as long as you learn the one mechanic and everyone gets a turn to be a GM, game was kind of designed. It was kind of like a party game meets an RPG. They both had a baby, and that was Vanguard. So it allowed for kids to be, have the spotlight as a GM and a player, experience both sides without having too much time in terms of prep or, taking away the spotlight from other people, because they also had little tokens where you could actually everyone gets an action during each one of the chapters. Like even the quiet kids, have an action. And I think it's also with if you take other RPGs that are already out there, like Dungeons and Dragons. My anecdote with that one was my son ended up playing that at a con. He played 5th Ed, and he brought it back to the kids here in the neighborhood, and they tried to make characters, and it was just a complete train wreck, like an hour and a half. And like, he's like, they all wandered off. We couldn't make the characters, and he was kind of dejected. And I said, well, come back. Let's try something different. I took my basic D&D box set, the red box set from 1980, and I handed it to him, and I said, try this. And he went over to their house. 20 minutes later, they all had characters, and they were on an adventure. And it really comes down to, the right RPG for the right group for that age, right? So I mean, definitely there's going to be, too much reading, too many like choices and steps to character creation. You're going to lose certain age groups, right? So you have to tailor the right game to the right kids at the right age, right?
Awesome.
I like that. Yeah.
And I'm definitely going to have to check out that Vanguard too.
Right? Yeah, same here. I know. I wrote that down. I was like, huh.
Were you going to say something, Richard?
I was just going to say that I agree with that. If you game and you have kids and they see you gaming, I mean, they're going to let you know when they're interested, I think. And then it's a matter of what Andrew said about, picking the right system and the right scenario and the right way of going at it, to where they're not going to be overwhelmed for their age. That
Right.
it's going to be fun and interesting for them.
And I think a lot of us who started when we were younger also remember when we were younger, and it's like we then weren't the same GMs or players that we are now, because we also had to learn, but also what we find entertaining isn't the same as what we thought was entertaining when we were 10 or 13 or 17. Our points of view would have been different as well. So somebody mentioned magical kitties would be awesome. So yeah, like, maybe if you're playing and you're like 9 years old, having a game where you're just playing cats that are, doing silly stuff is entertaining. Whereas, something like a D&D might be a little bit too mature for them as well. So, also what system they're playing or what they find entertaining. When you're 13, it's like all about fart jokes. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Although I think killing an orc is kind of universal.
Yeah. That's I'm gonna have to.
That's like an all ages pleasure.
Definitely, for sure. Let's see if there's another question here. Somebody mentioned pun. Those of you who know what pun is.
Nice.
Uh,
just real quick to kind of wrap up that other question though, while
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
looking. So I have 3 boys.
Right.
Of different ages, and I only mention it because kind of to what Andrew was saying, I had a similar situation where we were creating and finishing our Mystical Kingdom of Monsters,
Okay.
which is like Pokemon for Pathfinder, and
Nice.
yeah, and it's great. And while we were creating it, my son, who at the time was about 7 years old, was really interested in hanging out with me and watching me do it and like helping play test a lot of stuff. And so we would play together. But being 7 years old, he didn't have a full grasp of really like the Pathfinder rules. And so one of the things that we did was that helped me to kind of come up with what I call the fast play rules that are included in the book, where it turns it less into Pathfinder and more into actual Pokemon. So you don't have as much to track. You have just a few high points of what each monster has that you look at, that you read, and you use for the game. And so he and his cousin, who at the time was 5 years old, we all played together. We played a whole game together with him and both of his cousins, her brother, who's his age, and the 3 of them would play with his older brother. So there were 4 of them total. And sorry, I'm meandering a bit, but I'm just trying to remember all this. And but the 4 of them would play, and one of the things that was a lot of fun there was to keep her interest. She liked the idea of having the monsters and like doing stuff with them, but we actually took and printed out a lot of the monsters in black and white and had her do as coloring pages while we were playing. So she would capture a new monster and I'd give her a coloring page and say, there you go, there's your new monster. You can color it how you want.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important, is to look at different types of approaches for the game that's a little bit more tactile, some pieces more than just like how we grew up. We were just used to like pencil, eraser, and a piece of paper, right?
Right.
Theater of the mind.
They've grown up with so much more entertainment, like a digital age. They've got board games with beautifully printed 3D printed pieces, whereas we had like Monopoly and Risk with those little like abstract pieces, whereas now you look at the board games, it's incredible, like the sculpts that come with these tabletop games. So it's a whole different generation, right? So we have to craft that experience for them as well. Their interest level or spectrum isn't the same as ours. When we were kids, it's that they need a little bit of a different different tactile and look and feel to the game, right?
Is there anything that you
this is the guy over here that I was talking about? You get to play anthropomorphic animals.
Oh, I love the bear on the cover. That's
Yeah.
cool.
And there's a little bunny there too.
Nice.
That's awesome. Do you guys have to, when you have, say you've got kids over that are role playing with a bunch of other kids, since we're talking about people's kids, do you ever feel like there's something that you experience that either you do or don't want them to have to go through as kids growing up learning to GM or learning to role play? Let you think about that for a moment.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But they don't have to go through? What do you mean? Like,
is there something that you experience that you're like, man, I wished somebody would have like headed me off course of that, or an experience, from because we're of a different generation where things are different, where it's like, gosh, I really hope, like, I don't want them to get in a fight over, a rule or whatever it may be, that was like, might have been a bad experience that any of us might have had, that you think that you could keep from having happen to somebody else.
I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request.
I think the closest that I have really kind of to that would be just helping them streamline character creation. So kind of like Andrew was saying, when his kids tried to make D&D 5e characters, and they all just kind of got bored because what are we doing? We
Right.
don't know any of this, and it's just, there's like 4 pages on what to do with my character alone. What's a subclass, stuff like that. And so I do know that I have stepped in the past with my kids when they started playing, and of course they don't want to play with me anymore. And so, so it's like, well, okay, well, let's help you build characters real quick, and that way you can just kind of move into the playing of the game.
On my side, what I overheard was he was running a campaign on his birthday, and there were 2 kids that were just completely disruptive. They were not like role players, right?
Yeah.
They were over his birthday, but they were not the kind that would enjoy role-playing games. And so their entire purpose was to just disrupt the campaign and just turn it into like a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
And I took him aside afterwards, and I kind of explained to him that, like, RPGs aren't for everyone, and for these kids, like, definitely, imagination wasn't their strong suit, and they were out to make it miserable for everybody at the table. And when he gets his friends together for an RPG game, he'll be able to pick and choose the kids that really want to play.
Right.
Here it was it was a birthday party, so it was just his friends, not necessarily his friends that love role-playing games.
Right.
And so his experiences will be different. And then he kind of got that, and after that he crafted his perfect group for his tabletop games. But that was one of his experiences that almost soured it for him, because he was like, oh, what a terrible experience that was. These guys were just like being complete a-holes at my table, and everyone was having a miserable time because of that.
Richard, anything to add?
Well, when I started, this is kind of connect back to what I said before, but when I started out in D&D, it wasn't long before I found myself GMing for a bunch of other inexperienced people. And I was running the City State of the Invincible Overlord from Judges Guild from way back when.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they would have like street encounters in that. It's like, when you go down this street, there's a such and such a percentile chance or whatever that this will happen.
Right.
And those street encounters are not connected to level in the text or anything. And so I would, and I didn't know enough to say, no, it's not time for these characters to have this street encounter yet. So I would have, the party getting wiped out pretty regularly, and it was very frustrating for my players, and it made me feel bad, because I could tell they were frustrated, they weren't having fun, and I was in GM, I'm kind of responsible for making them have fun, right?
Right.
And it was just a bad experience, and so I would not wish that on anybody. I think that modern products do a much better job of saying, this is for characters from X level to Y level or whatever.
Yeah, that wasn't your fault, Rich. Like, I grew up in the same era of like old modules, and I remember like Keep on the Borderlands, right? I mean, you walk into the wrong cave on Keep of the Borderlands, forget it, bye-bye, TPK, right? I mean, there was no order to those caves and those encounters that were in those caves. So it's like all of those old modules, they were like unforgiving.
That very specific example actually happened in one of our games that we played, where I was describing to the group that they happened to find themselves in a cave area, and at one point I was describing this monster, and I was like, oh yeah, this gnome runs up to you and he's yelling, oh, look out, it's a bear, and they're like, a bear? We could take care of a bear, no big deal. So they go in there, and then this thing crawls across the ceiling on its 8 legs and spits lightning at them, and then they're like, oh, a bear. Got it. And so they had to run because they were not ready for that.
Right. That's funny. Sorry, I gotta remember that. That'll be fun to do.
That's still to this day we'll play sometimes, and somebody will just out of the blue be like, oh, a bear.
So, Andrew touched on a subject with his kids and having people that are disruptive or not helpful. And I'd like to get your guys' take on how GMs should deal with, and this is a question that was brought up in the thing. How do you deal? Let me look at it again. And it was asked earlier, and I just didn't hit it quite yet. And it was dealing with disruptive or trouble players in the group and how you kind of deal with them in your game to try and keep things mellow. So when you have disruptive players or people that are just there to be an issue, how do you deal with them maybe as a character and as a player? But I'll let you guys ruminate on that because we're going to take a quick little 10-15 minute break. We're at about the hour mark, so we'll take a little break. You guys can think about that and how to negotiate those kind of situations, and we'll come to that topic when we get back. Sound good?
Works for me.
Sure.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick little break. I am also going to run an ad here on the good old Twitch, so stick around. We'll be right back. Out of all the characters in this series, type in the answer because sometimes like woo, wee, wee, wee.
Glad y'all came to our hoot, Nanny. Good to see you, boss. How you enjoying yourself so far? Hey, get her another ale on me. No, get her 2 ales on me.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
The
Why
croaky
not?
bartender
I just
comes
gotta
back
just start
and sets
drinking.
2 mugs.
So you see that guy shows up and swings at you, and it scrapes across your armor as you cast your spell.
Cool. Mithril breastplate, bitch.
What is it that makes dialogue something that seems to come natural to you as opposed to other forms of writing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I do love dialogue, and I feel like dialogue is my greatest strength. I was able to recently write a short story that was entirely dialogue, which has always been a goal of mine. And it was amazing because I don't like description. I work very, very hard at description. I add more and more in every single draft. But for me, dialogue is what comes the most natural and the easiest. And I think it's because you'll hear a lot of authors talk about how they see their books playing out like movies, and they're describing what they're seeing. I'm not a visual person. My books are words. That's all they are.
Mhm.
Like if you ask me to describe my characters, I can tell you what descriptors I use in the book, but I don't see them in my head. I don't see any of
Right.
it in my head. It's entirely words.
When you're working, especially in that era, were you still a fan just as much as you were a worker, or was it like now that I'm working here, there's no fandom as much anymore? Or were you still like, oh my gosh, this is Denny O'Neil, or oh my gosh, this is whoever?
It's funny. I mean, I always liked Denny O'Neil's stuff and I always appreciated it, but I idolized Archie Goodwin.
Mhm.
And it was sometimes it was difficult, as nice a guy, as wonderful and generous a guy as Archie was. Sometimes it was difficult for me to be, because he was aware that I idolized.
Right.
And Denny talked to me about that one time, and he goes, "Well, why don't you act that way around me?" And I said, "Denny, I don't idolize." I said, "I respect you." And I said, "But Archie goes back to when I was a kid, and all that."
Right.
And I said, "You don't scare me, O'Neil," which he cracked up. But
How did you get over to DC?
Denny, it wasn't Denny. It was, I think Kelly Puckett was his assistant at the time. And Kelly Puckett called and said that Denny would like to speak to me about working on a possible Robin miniseries
Okay.
with the new Robin. And I had been reading the book, so I knew what was going on.
And which new Robin is this?
Tim Drake.
Okay.
The one that you discovered.
The one that I discovered. All right.
So
hey, I want to do your books, or did somebody else kind of connect you to?
He actually rescued me from Bahrain when he was in his army days.
Okay.
And he took a helicopter in. No, he's one of those guys who's got pretty good stories like that. So I wish it was cooler. He got onto me through Hunter.
Okay.
Hunter and he knew each other. Hunter Blaine is another series that I do the Preternatural Chronicles for. And Hunter he was pumping, Justin was starting his stuff and Hunter suggested me. And the thing that sets Justin apart is he's like, talks the talk and walks the walk, in that he's like, I want to do this, and then he does all these things to follow through, like getting the sales up by working the promotion, by putting some money in, so we have really killer covers now. So he's one of those guys that like is hungry and also really easy to hang out and talk to, which are sometimes don't always go together.
Run away. Kill steal.
Ha! Yeah!
Down here.
These guys don't take damage if they're in the air. They only take damage when they're on the ground. Boom!
Oh! Now that's a warhammer.
Well, that wasn't so bad. I realized I ran out of balls. I got no balls. Don't clip that. Don't clip that. Dirty Poot Box with 15, 6, and 6. Like, Dirty Poot Box. That's one of the best names I've ever seen. Oh my god.
A new yet not so new spin on how a soul works. Gives me an idea, if you relate it to quantum physics. To me, it makes the most sense out of what an afterlife could possibly be, mixing the scientific with the metaphysical. Okay.
Out of all the characters in this series, Oberon's kind of like the one that everyone goes, oh my god, this is the best.
Yeah. Well, here's the weird thing about it is that Oberon, in terms of his growth, he grows in his language, but otherwise, as a character, he doesn't. He's really a flat character. He likes sausages and poodles at the beginning, and he still likes them at the end. You know what I mean? He's always a dog.
Yeah.
So he's not a character that I had to work on. He was just there to provide his little his comments on things as we went. I didn't plan a single thing for Oberon as I went. And yet here he is, the most popular character. I spend all this time trying to figure out, well, how is Atticus going to grow and how is the Morgan going to grow and so on and so forth. But, took a lot of time, but what everybody likes is the very simple character Oberon. So I thought that was an interesting irony. It continues to amuse me, and I'm really glad people dig it.
You had Starfinder, which
fortunately I had something else to put my heart and soul into.
Definitely something to have that space elevator bring you to.
Yeah. No, and it did. It really, let me tell you, that one in Verissia was not the last space elevator that I stuck in. I think I finally got one in there somewhere. But maybe the particle accelerator I put in Belkson.
Now is the time to do it. Do it good. Yes. The volume. Turn it up, yeah. Turn it up, yeah. Turn it up, yeah. Turn it up, yeah. I don't. Originally, that started off with me wanting to do pump up the jam, pump it up, but I had the wrong words, so I just was like, I'm just gonna cover it up by saying other stuff and try and make it sound like it was in not a. Shit! Motherfucker! Oh, you bastard identity! Oh, you bastard identity! Oh man! Thank you for the terrifying bits. Oh my god!
So by these stairs, if the ghost starts hunting, you can.
All right, and we are back from break, everyone. Where we last left off, we had a subject had gotten brought up. One of the people in our chat had asked about it, And also, it kind of, before I said anything, it got brought up by Andrew here about dealing with problem players or people that are disruptive in a game. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they, you're at a table with a bunch of random people, and people just, one person just isn't getting along. They play differently. So since Andrew, you were the one that mentioned it with your son's group, how do you deal with disruptive players? And I'm not going to let you say take an axe to their head. That's not an answer.
Okay. So we've designed metal runes for our game. I will throw a bag of metal runes at my home game players. That'll give them like a good concussion, and they'll learn their lesson.
Right.
So that's for my regular weekly game. So this is not for my public games. Don't worry, come to my
Okay.
games. There will be no concussions. No, so normally it's a social contract, right? So if you're starting, let's say, a long-term campaign, have a conversation with your players, right? There's that session 0 that gets talked about, right? So have a session 0, talk to your players about what the expectations are at the table, because that's going to head off a lot of problems down the road, right? So the players are going to talk to you about what they expect out of the game. You're going to set out what your goals are going to be for the adventure, and then you're going to have that meeting place, right? So that's going to head off a lot of these kind of like unexpected dead ends and these like, miscommunications and missed expectations later down the road that can cause disruptive players or disruptive situations to rise at the table. And so this is going to be for your weekly game for a long-term campaign. And if they do arise, then the best thing is to just have a conversation. Like, don't let that fester. Talk to them, quickly at the table if possible. If this is something that needs to be addressed in a more private setting, take them aside after the game and, talk to them about it and see if that can be course corrected. If, it's just irreconcilable in terms of, their play style does not match your GM style, then you just guys go your separate ways. I mean, the bottom line is everyone has to have fun, right? And if someone's not having fun, then, find different groups. There's enough people, enough gamers in the world. The other aspect of it, which I'm more faced with, are the convention games. And so I run a ton of convention games, and I do end up sitting down with players that I don't know. And in those cases, it has to be nipped in the bud like as quickly as possible, because rule 0 there is everyone has to feel safe at the table.
Right.
No one can, feel unsafe. Everyone has to have fun. And so that has to be dealt with like right away. So if anyone's kind of putting off a menacing vibe or killing the fun for someone else at the table, I deal with it right away at the table. And that has to be done at conventions, because that's one of the things that our hobby has to tackle. And this is one of those problems that we can't sweep under the rug.
Right.
We have to talk about it. We have to expose it. We have to deal with it.
And how do you deal with those players?
I immediately address it right there at the table. So, I mean, one of the most extreme cases was someone actually overtly had like an off-color racist joke. And I just stopped the game right there in the tracks. And I just looked at the player and I go, that's strike 1 and 2. If you go down this path, you're ejected from the game. And one of the other players that was a real asshole thing to say. And like pretty much everyone at the table basically gave the person their last warning. And
Okay.
the guy was like, oh yeah, and just fixed their attitude for the rest of the
Yeah.
day.
So just gotta set those boundaries.
Yeah, pretty much.
Richard, have you had to deal with troublesome players like that? Any issues? Maybe not that specific example, but
Well, not in recent years, because I've been GMing for the same group of friends who
Right.
have been gaming together forever, and everybody knows what's expected. But I have had experiences previously with the problem players, and I think that your approach depends on kind of what sort of problem it is. I mean, I've been in groups where there are a couple just people who just seemed to the rest of us to be total assholes, and they were asked to not come back. There are less extreme kind of problems you can encounter than that. I had the first Champions game that I ever ran, I had a friend who was a real master of building powerful characters, and he built and I was jamming it, and none of us ever played it before, and I was jamming it, and he built a character that was just so far outshadowed all the other characters and all the threats that I threw at the group that I took him aside and said, look, this character's got to go. How would you feel about it if I set up a scenario where he dies a heroic death, and then you bring in a new character, and the new character you bring in will have the same number of points everybody else has now. He won't be starting at a deficit from where all the other characters are, but you'll just have to build it in a somewhat more restrained manner. And he was cool with that, and that pretty much solved the problem. Sometimes you have a problem, I think, where there's a subplot suggested by a character's backstory, and the player gets really interested in it, and he's hell bent on following up on that instead of doing the mission, or whatever, and the rest of the group is going to do. And I think at that point you just have to tell him, look, I can't GM for two, I can't GM for two paths at the same time. That you should go on the mission, and this subplot that you were so interested in, that'll be the subject of another adventure. Sometimes you have the problem that the character is the guy's just decided to play like a chaotic evil thief or something, and he's constantly robbing and betraying the rest of the party. And then so sometimes in situations like that, you can just let the rest of the party deal with it. They say, we've had enough of this, can we kill him? And you say, yeah. And they do.
Right. Well, and the players got to understand too, like there is I've said this for other, not necessarily on this show, but I've said it, we did some GM panels at local conventions, and I said that, like, yes, there's always what your character does, but you're in control of your character. So while your character may choose to do X, Y, Z, you're still in control of your character, and you're still in control of the narrative, and you can change their reasoning that still fits the character. Like, yes, they'd go this way, but what would it take for them? What reasoning would they think of to go this way? And then go, okay, well, that's why they choose to go that way instead of the other way then, because it's still a way that their character would choose to go that way. You're in charge of how your character thinks. So what would it take to make your character to think to go the way that the game needs to go to not take it off the rails, is something I've always said. Kevin, what about dealing with problematic players on your end?
Sure. I've had a few examples in the past of varying extremes. I think the one that I like to talk about is this gentleman. Before I was still fairly new at the game, we were playing a round robin session of GMing. So everybody would switch every week, and somebody else would GM for the group and continue the story, right? So kind of a yes and situation. And that was a lot of fun. We had a guy who I didn't know it was a thing back then, but he was making the stereotypical I'm a drow who's trying to be good in Faerun character situation. And but at the same time, he had this established character that he wanted to play that was just the most abrasive person to interact with. I happened to be playing a half dragon sorcerer at the time, and he was one of those it's what my character would do kind of people. And so we got to a point where we went into a dungeon, and as we're walking through, he just got upset about something. I don't remember what exactly, but he basically said, well, I'm just going to start going through all the doors and just go, and I'll open the door, I'll walk through it, I'll go to the next one, I'll open the door, I won't even look at what's in there. And like from what the module or whatever it was we were playing, that's going to get the attention of all these monsters, and everybody's going to get attacked, and we're basically going to wipe the party.
Right.
So my character basically followed him through the first door, telling him, you really don't want to do this, and he wouldn't listen. So finally she killed him, and because he was like, oh, that's what my character would do. And so she killed him, and I was like, I'm sorry, that's what my character would do. I mean, you and the rest of the party agreed, but at the same time, she ended up dying because the group he was like kind of the de facto leader of the group, And when everything finally, we calmed down, we killed all the monsters and we finished everything. And he was like, "You killed him?" And I was like, "I did." And he's all, "Well, I'm going to have to take you in because, you know, that's murder. You didn't kill him in defense or anything." And I was like, and it ended up being a role play experience for all of us that was actually kind of fun. And the player himself didn't mind. Like, that was the weirdest thing, because yes, he was one of those "that's what my character would do" kind of people, but at the same time, he accepted the consequences of having done so.
Right.
And so it ended up being an interesting role play situation for all of us that we got to go through, and both of us ended up with new characters on the next session, and we went on from there. But you know, so there was that one, right? And then we've also had issues where we had to kind of step aside with somebody and say, "Hey, we don't, you know, this is some very adult situations that you're putting our characters in." He was actually the GM at the time, and we
Okay.
were like, "And we aren't very comfortable with this at all. Like,
Right.
we need to step this back, or we're going to have to play something else." Or, and you know, he said it was okay, and then went right back into doing it the next time. So we basically just didn't game with him again after that. So
Yeah, and sometimes these things put people in hard situations. Like, it's not always easy. This question itself isn't always one easy to tackle or give advice on, because sometimes, no matter what your advice is, it's still going to turn out bad. Like, sometimes it's just people are going to walk away with hard feelings, and you have to realize that when you broach subjects like this, there might be hard feelings. There might be difficult times. There might, you might, sadly, very sadly, there are people that lose friends sometimes over things like this. And I want to emphasize, it's still just a game. You can still be friends. So
absolutely. I think, and one thing I'd like to add, just for anybody out there who's wondering, you know, if you run into that situation, you haven't had to deal with it in the past, try to have somebody else there, just another player, or, you know, and especially if you're younger and in a younger group, you know, and so there's more, I guess, emotion to it at that point would be a good way to put that. But, you know, try not to just have it be a one-on-one kind of scenario, to have somebody there to back you up and work between the two of you.
Right. I also suggest, don't make it a confrontation. Make it
Right.
a group trying to come to a solution to a problem. Because when you get to confrontations, that's when fights begin, and that's when arguments begin and yelling. And you don't want that. It's about having fun. And you can always say, "Hey, we just want to make this game fun for everyone. Some people aren't having fun with XYZ." And it's as simple as that. At least that's my 2 cents on the subject. I may be the moderator, but I can put in my
Good
2 cents,
advice.
right, guys?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's great.
2 gold.
So we are talking about, like, we mentioned earlier, and I don't remember exactly which conversation in this kind of fits into our next subject. So instead of saying this is what we talked about earlier, I'm just going to say, let's change the subject.
Segue.
Segue, not segue at all. When you're shifting things on the fly, because sometimes it's like something happens that completely changes what's going on. And something like, maybe the players did something that you completely didn't expect. Maybe they have an item that they didn't expect. Maybe there's, just something happens that throws you for a loop, and you have to take your adventure, ball it up into a piece of paper, and throw it over your shoulder. Especially when you're a newer GM. When you're a newer GM and you might not be fully prepped for something, or you don't have that experience for working on the fly. How do you go about shifting things on the fly? Richard, we'll start off with you.
Well, I haven't had too many experiences where, like, the whole scenario just had to be junked.
Yeah.
I've had kind of lesser versions of the same thing where people don't find the clue that I absolutely had to have them find to,
Right.
to
Yeah,
go
that
on to
counts.
the next chapter, or or the person that would have confided that clue is, didn't save them and they got executed, or the big monster that I thought was going to be the big climactic encounter, they're able to kill it really fast,
Right.
and undramatically. And I mean, in all those situations, I mean, I think that the main thing is to say, what is the what was the objective here? You know, what was the story arc? And given that this element has been subtracted, what you know, what can I jam in on the fly to keep it running?
Yeah.
Or like I said, if the big monster goes down really fast at the end, and it's going to be a letdown if that's all there is. What can I have? You know, that actually was the next to the last cave. What's in the last cave now?
Right.
And just you know, it's just a matter of, you know, shifting out elements for me.
Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely. So new GMs will look at, let's say, a published adventure and say, okay, this clue is in this room, in this drawer. This NPC holds this piece of information. The PCs need to go down the left hallway. And if they don't do this in this order, A, B, C, then the story can't progress. One of the things that's a trap. Like, that's one of the things the beginner GM needs to just kind of get their mindset out of that trap and say, listen, this is a story arc that's very malleable. If they need to find the clue for the story to continue, it doesn't necessarily need to be in that drawer. It needs to be in the room that they're currently searching. You don't need to get them into that room for that drawer. Just make it happen. If they turn right instead of turning left, and now you're like in a conundrum, no, just make right the new left. That's where the story needed to go. And just like Rich said, if that boss was completely anticlimactic and you ended up beating him in one combat round, well, that was the henchman. And now you hear the ominous music, and you hear the footsteps, and the door crashes open at the back of the throne room, and now the real boss comes out. I mean, there's the story arc is the most important thing, right? You want to present this like a movie or a novel, right? You don't want to be like a video game where you have to click on the right pixel to move to the next chapter. That's infuriating, that you have to like auto map or map the dungeon to get from point A to point B. This has to be an entertaining story. That's what a role-playing game is all about. And so it has to ebb and flow, and you don't want it to stall out. If you find that the players are stalled out, spinning in a circle, not knowing where to go next, it's because something in the adventure is missing, your next step. And so you need to get them, either you push them to that next step or push the next step right in front of them. And if it means, you know, one of them gets stuck with an arrow with like a scroll attached to the arrow with, you know, the clue right there written on that scroll, then that's what it takes. Get them to that next step. That's the best piece of advice.
Kevin?
Oh man, Andrew stole my answer.
Well, you'll have to come up with another one.
I know, right? No, so I think to add on to both Richard and Andrew, a lot of times for me it comes down to the question is, you know, will the group have fun with the new direction that we're going in, right? So if something happens all of a sudden that's unexpected, and the party is going with it, and we're just right in the middle of playing, and we don't want to go and stop, you know, I will just roll with it and be like, all right, so here we go. This is the next thing that we're doing, and I'll kind of do like Andrew was suggesting, and incorporate the letter in the box that was across the hall is now right here in front of you, and it happened to be on the guy because he was in there before you, and he took it and rolled it up and stuck it in his pocket, you know. But I've had a couple failings myself recently in our games where I had a trap that I wanted to establish, like a puzzle that the group was going to solve, and I got it in my head that I was like, okay, the only thing they have to do is go and bring the torches over and light them in this brazier thing that they've got. It's a huge bronze fire pit, right? And there's these torches on these doorways, but if you walk in the doorways while they're not lit, you come right back out the other one. So you have to light them, and then that's all you have to do, though. You light them, it takes the darkness away. Now you can walk through. Very, very Legend of Zelda-esque.
Yeah.
But in describing it to the party, I did not remember. I didn't properly explain that the torches themselves were not lit. I simply explained that they were torches. And so the party's sitting there for probably half an hour, like scratching their heads. We don't know what to do. And I was like,
They
so
assumed they were lit.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly. They did. They thought they were lit. And so finally I was like, okay, somebody roll a D20 where we've gone past the point of it being entertaining now. Let's just get through it. And I was like, so you need to take the torch, you need to go over and light it. And they were like, oh, they weren't lit. And I was like, correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
is there a time, and we'll just start with you, Kevin, is there
Sure.
a time when it's not a good idea to shift things on the fly?
I don't think so. I wouldn't say there isn't a good time to do it. I guess the only thing that would come close would be if it would detract from the party's entertainment, right? So from the game itself, right? You all have to have fun. And if shifting the game to match something is going to take away from that, then I would say that would be the only time that I would really try to avoid it at all costs.
Andrew, do you agree? Do you have more to add to that? Disagree?
Yeah, I think your question kind of segues into Kevin's answer there about the puzzles. So let's say the players really enjoyed puzzles, and so they would just get a kick. I remember there was one GM that really loved making puzzles, and his group really enjoyed solving puzzles. And I played with this group, and every week it was almost like, you know, they were expecting a new puzzle from this GM, and he'd come up with something new for them. And that would be kind of like a social contract between them. He would not give them clues. He would not rearrange it. This would be a scenario where, you know, you wouldn't make it easier on your party because they wanted that challenge, right? So yeah, there'd be situations like that where I think, you know, you'd want to keep the bar high. And yeah.
Is there a time where it's not a good idea to work on the fly, in your opinion?
Well, that's what I mean, like something like that, where you wouldn't rearrange it because they're having a hard time, right?
Gotcha,
So let's say that they're all scratching their head for like 45
minutes. But that's what
minutes.
you want them to do, so you don't want to adjust it because you want them
exactly.
I gotcha.
They'd be like, no, don't adjust it for us. Like, we want to figure this out, you know, even if it takes us another hour. I couldn't take it. I was like, okay,
I'll be over here.
You guys have fun. Bye.
Richard, your thoughts? Do you think there's a time where it's not a good idea?
Like I said, when the scenario goes off the tracks for me, my improvisation usually does take the form of okay, well, how do I get them the clue or whatever that reorients them and leads them on towards a hopefully satisfying conclusion. As far as the puzzle thing goes, the thought that just occurred to me is that I've incorporated puzzles and had players say, well, you know, I'm going to roll on my character's high intelligence or whatever, and if I hit the difficulty number, then you'll give me the answer, right? And the way I've always handled that is to say, yes, I would, but does the group want the fun of trying to solve the puzzle just with the player's own real intelligence first?
Right.
And my experience has been that the people I've played with have normally said, yeah, let's try that. And then if it goes for a while, you will and then nobody's come up with it. It's like, okay, you know, enough of this, roll on the wizard's intelligence or whatever.
Right.
The other thing I just could say about puzzles is that you want to make sure there's only one answer. Early on, when I was GMing, I had a puzzle that was an anagram, and one of the words was the letters in one of the words could be rearranged to make two different words, and I handled it really badly. I should have, when they rearranged the letters to come up with the word that was there, but not the word I had in mind, I should have let that be the solution.
Right.
But I didn't, and it was not a particularly fun evening for the players that time, because they just like, well, from their attitudes, like, we already solved it. We got the real words. They're right here. What more do you want? You know, and I was a relatively inexperienced GM, and I really didn't know how to handle it. And so, you know, you can bulletproof your puzzles by having there only be one solution. Think twice about what you put up, especially with something like an anagram.
Well, we've got the internet now, right? Back in our day, we'd have to go to the library to check out a book for something like that.
Right. But that's an amazing story, though, because for people that are new, like, that just shows that like you can screw things up. It's not going to end your life if you make a mistake on something like that. I've been known personally to over prep, and then I'm like, well, I over prepped, and now this one little thing doesn't work, and my entire mind's like, oh, the entire game is ruined. No, it's not ruined. You can adjust it on the fly, and it just gives you that notion that like as GMs you can make mistakes, because that, as we all said earlier, you can learn from that. And that is just a great story about this is what happened and this is how it went bad, but this is what I should have done. And, that's something that now that is a lesson that everybody watching can learn from without having to experience that. Is learning that experience. And I love puzzles. I particularly love making mazes and trying to figure out, okay, how can I make this maze feel like a maze to the players? So that's one of my type of puzzles that I always like, is putting them in some sort of a maze and they have to find their way around and find it through. But how can you do it where it's not just like a drawing and they're like, because you can see where they're going and stuff like that. So it's
another secret is you can come up with a puzzle with no solution. Just throw a bunch of like random ingredients in a room and just have them struggle for like 10 minutes, and whatever they come up with, there's the answer.
That's the answer. Yeah.
Brilliant, guys.
I love that.
It's wonderful.
And then they don't know. They're like,
Brilliant.
oh my gosh, that was genius on your half. You're an amazing GM. Yep. I'm amazing.
I did something like that where we had, I found this online dungeon that somebody had created and shared, and I was running my group through it. And it had several rooms that were like that. That was like, there's not really anything in this room, but here's a couple situations. So let the party look around. Like one of them was like, there's a statue pointing an arrow off to the side, and then there's like a ring that's sitting on the other side of the room, and like obviously they got in there and they were like, oh, so we're gonna move the statue to face the ring and watch it shoot the arrow. And I was like, that's exactly what it does.
Somebody in chat just goes, how long are you going to fight the dragon? Until it stops being fun.
Yes, very much so. Hit points are just a guideline.
When you guys are finding, we're going to change the subjects again to our next and final pre-prep question. Of course, if people in the chat have some, and we have a bunch of questions in there, so I may or may not read them. But I appreciate people that are asking questions. And again, anybody who asks questions, if we don't get to them tonight, they get saved for future episodes. So don't feel bad if your question doesn't get asked. It will show up. It will show up. Maybe not on this show, but on a future show.
Tune in.
Finding plot hooks and developing an adventure and campaign start. How do you find when either at the start of a game or on an existing game where you're like in between things, how do you guys go about finding your plot hooks? Do you just like get them from movies? Do you like read something in a newspaper and go, oh, that would be a great plot hook? Like, where's your go-to place to kind of get your adventure plot hooks? Richard, we'll give you the start.
Well, a lot of times the plot hooks will come from the characters that have been created. I mean, like I said, might have the character who's an orphan and wants to find his his real parents. Well,
yeah.
Okay, that can be an adventure. So I always look at that. Depending on the genre that I'm in, I look at the stories that have been published in that genre. I'm normally running in a genre I'm pretty familiar with. I've just wrapped up a big superhero role-playing campaign, and I'm a lifelong comic book guy, so it's not too hard to look at all the different kind of stories that have been done in superhero comics over the years and say, okay, let's do this kind, now. And so I guess for me, that's the two sources: the characters' backstories themselves, and then whatever genre I'm working in and what I know about all the stories I've read in that.
Andrew?
Anything and everything. I mean, it's all the media that I consume, books, literature, comic books, video games, movies, other role-playing games, just pretty much anything, imagination. It all kind of comes together. And then also the players themselves. When we do like a session 0 at the start of a campaign, we start talking about like what kind of adventures we'd want to have, and then we drill down on each one of the characters. Like Rich said, let's look at, you know, the life paths that the characters want to have. So most of the RPGs that we do end up playing have some sort of life path systems, or if they don't, we kind of bolt something on, or we, you know, create backstories for each one of the characters. And we have that as kind of like the undergirding of, you know, whatever meta arc we have.
Right.
And that kind of like reinforces whatever meta arc we have, that we can always fall back on that as like, you know, a subplot that'll kind of carry the story along. And then a lot of times, like, you know, my players have ADD, so, you know, whatever end up, you know, wherever we end up starting, they'll end up going like, hey, look, shiny thing over there. And you know, wherever we were planning on going is not where we end up. So and that's just as fun, as long as everyone's having a good time. So, you know, again, I'm as I get older, like I said, long-term planning is becoming less and less, and just fly by the seat of your pants.
Kevin?
Nice. Yeah. Well, so for plot hooks, I got some really good advice from a friend many years ago that I still use today, and that is, if you know the general idea for the story that you're going to follow, or even the adventure path or module or whatever you're going to do, even if it's established already, ask your players to determine what their character was doing a month, 2 weeks, 1 week, a couple days ago in relation to that scenario. You know, oh, you know, there's an attack on the kingdom at the border. There's a whole war going on, and they're trying to get people to join. Okay, well, what was your guy doing last month whenever that first happened? Did you go and sign up for it? Did you maybe try to hide because you didn't want to be conscripted? Something like that. And that has always helped us to build characters that not just help to inform the game, but even if there is a character that may not necessarily fit into the storyline naturally, you have those answers of the reasons why they ended up there in the first place. You know, and a lot of times that even helps to establish connections between different characters. So then our players are working together and they already know each other, or, you know, here's the reason why they meet is because just a couple days ago you came into town because you're trying to find a new safe place to hide because they're looking for you to bring you into the war. You know,
that's a very important point, is the connections between characters. And that brings us back to some of our older points, is if you end up having those connection points between characters, why are they adventuring together? How do they know each other? What are their bonds? You know, what are their connections? That can actually stop some of those, you know, infighting and things like that
Right.
we talked about earlier, inter-party conflicts. And, you know, why is this character, you know, this player playing an edgelord or whatnot, you know, that's causing conflict in the party. So that's an awesome point, Kevin. It's just like, yeah, if you can end up making that inter-character relationship early on as part of the overarching story as well, that's gold.
Yeah, we had a really fun one that we played where I was playing a half-orc bard. His name was Akdak, ACDC, and he was we started the campaign, it was like level 3 or something, and I had a previously established connection to another character who was a like a swashbuckler type, and that was with our group. And I told basically the story we came up between ourselves was that we're going from town to town because my character is a self-help coach, and his brand of self-help is to go into the bars and get people who need help and tell them, you know, like somebody's like, oh, I need help getting rid of these monsters. And it's like, okay, well, learn how to use a sword. And if you go out and you kill a couple of them, you can scare off the other ones really easily. Okay, that's going to be 3 gold. Wait, what? I thought I was hiring you as an adventurer. No, I'm a self-help coach. You can go do it yourself, and you pay me because I told you how to do it.
Somebody in chat just asked if he was thunderstruck.
Yes, indeed he was. But yeah, no, that what ended up happening was it established that, so we ended up going from town to town because we kept getting run out of town because people were like, why are you charging us money to not help us? Wow. And so my friend ended up that was kind of where we started the campaign at with that.
Do you guys pre-plan the whole campaign storyline, or do you just go adventure to adventure until you get to higher levels, and then like you come up with the boss, or how do you deal with the big overall storyline?
I think for me it depends on the individual game, right? I've done each of those in different ways. I've had an overarching story where one of the characters was trying to find out her parentage, and the party helped her do that, and they went on many adventures to eventually learn that she didn't have parentage. She was actually a golem that was created. So that was a really fun one, to end the campaign on the fact that they were facing down the guy that adopted her to the church, and turns out she was a golem, so she didn't actually have parents. And then, but then there were others where it was just adventure to adventure that we would go and eventually kind of latch onto something that we would stick with for a while.
Richard?
I've done it both ways. I've had the ones where you go adventure to adventure to adventure, and then but the big superhero campaign that I just wrapped up, I had a fairly complicated overarching story that involved time travel and shifting to alternate worlds and reality becoming all screwed up because the forces of hell and the forces of these Lovecraftian elder gods were both invading the earth, and the future timeline that had been established, they had successfully invaded. So you have to go back in time and straighten out where you went wrong. And anyway, it was a whole thing. And so I've done both.
Andrew, how about yourself?
So for products that we have to design and publish, I have to design like an overarching storyline. So for example, like when we went to Denizens of the North and Lords of the Ash, we have like very large vignettes of adventures at the backs of these thick books that span like several years of story arcs that take you across like the Midgard kingdoms and the wars between them, and the other ones are the wars between the gods and the giants during Ragnarok, and the theft of like a goat that creates a mead from its udder. So there's all kinds of really fun adventures that have to happen. So we can't deviate from certain plot points that need to make it into print. So in those cases, I have to regretfully stick to those hard plot points. But whenever I can run amok, usually at conventions, then usually those are my preferred MOs. Like Gary Con, I let loose like 9 a.m. I sit down at a table and players come and sit down and start playing with me, and then we play till like midnight, and we just fly by the seat of our pants. As people get up, people sit down, the seats never grow cold, and we just play all day long with absolutely no plot points. We just keep going with like a crazy adventure wherever it takes us.
Nice.
Fun. All right, guys. You guys were gracious enough to join us today and be on the show, and I want you guys to be able to talk about some of your projects you have coming up, or have come out, or places you're going to be coming up. Richard, tell us about some of the stuff you've been working on and what you have coming up, and all of your stuff.
Okay, well, my most recent short story that came out was in this book, Grimmer Tales. I don't know if people can see it well enough in our own, but it's kind of fading in and out of reality or something. Anyway, it's a book of reimagined Grimm's fairy tales.
Okay.
And it just came out. I'm very pleased with the story I wrote for that. Ed Greenwood is in here, and a bunch of Lucian Diver, Susan Morris, a bunch of good writers are in there. My third Marvel Legends of Asgard novel comes out in October. That is The Prisoner of Tartarus, and it completes my first Heimdall Trilogy, which is basically the trilogy that tells the story of Heimdall as we know him from Marvel Comics and how he came to be that guy. And I think people, well, certainly anybody that enjoyed the first two books will enjoy the third one. Other than that, I've got other stuff in the works, but those pesky NDAs keep me from telling you guys anything about them yet. But there will be more, but that's I can't tell you what yet.
Are you going to be at any other on any other shows or at any events?
Yeah, I'll be at there's several conventions called Necronomicon around the country. I'll be at the one in Tampa. in September. Earlier in September, I will be at Gen Con in Indianapolis.
Awesome. Amazing.
And I'm part of the Writers Symposium, so people can see me at Writers Symposium events. And I understand that Aconite Books, that does the Marvel novels that I'm involved in, is going to have a presence there under the umbrella of Asmodee. So I guess I'll be at the Asmodee table selling and signing novels at certain points.
Awesome. Well, I may or may not be at Gen Con. We are in the lineup to possibly get an any for the podcast. So
very cool.
We'll see if I get an official nomination or not. So
awesome. Rooting
and if
for
so,
you,
I'll have to be at Gen Con for that if that happens. So Andrew,
Are
what
the
about
polls
you?
open to vote right now?
It goes open on tomorrow. I think tomorrow.
There you go.
I think
All
so.
right.
I'll keep you guys listening. I'll keep you guys posted.
We'll retweet you.
Andrew, what do you got going on? Stuff coming up? You just had your Kickstarter.
Yeah, we just released this beast of a beautiful book, Children of Eriu. So this is our Celtic RPG. So we do all Viking RPGs, but this is our first foray into the Celtic kingdoms. So this one was released in January. And then our latest Kickstarter, which is the Ultimate Viking Anthology, is 3 novels by 3 established authors, Ed Greenwood, Michelle Franklin, and Stephen Pearl, along with 2 graphic novels, and then a city box set by Ed Greenwood and myself, which is a standalone RPG in our Fate of the Norns universe. So this will be like a city-centric RPG called Athcliath. All of this comes out somewhere around springtime, summertime. And then we're going to be attending Origins next month. We'll probably see you at Gen Con. And then we are going to be at Montreal Comic Con and PAX West and a whole bunch of other conventions that are I think on our website. So it's going to be we're making up for all the closures in the last 2 years. So this year is going to be just a big wild ride of conventions.
And you're also on Twitch. You have a Twitch channel and you do your what's it called?
The Fireside Chat.
Yeah, the Fireside Chat.
Every Tuesday when we're in town, when we're not at conventions, we either have guests on or we talk about anything. We have industry guests on, just like you, talk about their products and their projects, or we just talk about Vikings and tabletop games. And Thursdays, we sometimes stream games like Valheim or other fun video games. Just relax with some mead, a beer, and just kick back and chat with the fans.
Awesome. Kevin, tell us about Samurai Sheepdog and all of your stuff.
With Samurai Sheepdog, we are currently publishing and finishing our Kickstarter for Lands of Thea by Stephen Rashid James. That's for Pathfinder 1st Edition, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and D&D 5th Edition. The 1st edition Pathfinder copy is actually printed and ready now. It's actually in print and available. You have to see that on the screen, but you can find it. And I'm actually working on finishing the 2nd edition version right now, and hopefully the 5th edition version before the end of the year. So all 3 of them will be available. I also publish regularly to my Patreon, Names Games, which you probably see right here on the thing behind me. Basically, we're 3 years in. This is the beginning. This month is actually the beginning of our 4th annual cycle of released content every single month. And we put together those books into 200+ page compilations for every year. We've got 2019, 2020, and I just sent out the update for 2021. We run April through March. So right now is as good a time as any to get us to jump in and join us if you're interested. I do requests. I actually have several levels of requests that are in there that you can do. And that helps to put, new content out. Sometimes it's absolutely bonkers stuff. Somebody's like, I want this anime character to be able to make. And it's like, all right, well, how do you do that within the rules of the game? So let's get that figured out. But yeah, so I'm super happy to be celebrating 3 years done of that and going on our 4th with a pretty decent group of people that have been following me, which is really nice.
Awesome. That's amazing. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Do you have any events or locations you're going to be at or on shows you'll be on either?
Yeah. I know I've been on Dustin Knight's podcast for Pathfinder 2nd Edition once or twice. And I do regular content for Pathfinder Infinite. So I might be on there again at some point down the road. I look forward to coming back here at some time, when you'll have me. And also, as for conventions and stuff, not really going to hit the convention scene this year. We're going to push one more year before we really try to do anything else.
Yeah.
But I actually do plan and hope to be at the Rochester Maker Fair later on this year. It's usually middle of November, maybe even pushing into December.
Okay.
But it's just a huge thing here in Rochester, New York that we do, where it's a bunch of people that are local that do content creating and like robots and other small businesses that do stuff around here local, and they get to show off all the things that they do, and we like to go there and set up a whole booth, and we've got banners and stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. That's amazing. Well, guys, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate your time. Our people in the chat, I'm sure that they appreciate your time, and we had a lot of people listening in. We had a couple people asking questions, but I appreciate all three of you, and hopefully you guys will come back to do another episode sometime. As the people listening know, I've said this before, we're going to change it up. So last show we had 3 different guests, and maybe you'll see some of them mixed with some of these people, mixed with some of our other future shows. So thank you all 3 of you for joining us. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks for hosting.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much.
Cool.
And as I always say, if you guys ever need anything from me, you know my email. Just shoot me a message. I am gonna send our viewers on a raid, and we are gonna go in a raid. Someone who is streaming right now, and the raid is sending all of our viewers on over. We're gonna send them over to Jason Bullman, who is, some of you might know from Pathfinder RPG. He is playing 7 Days to Die right here on Twitch. So we will go and do that raid, provided Twitch wants to do it. There we go. All right. So thank you all very much for joining us on the show. I hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys all on Monday. We are interviewing author Rhiannon Held will be joining us, also known as RZ Held, on Monday's podcast right here on Twitch. So make sure to join us 6 p.m. Central Standard Time for Rhiannon Held, and we will see you guys next time. Take care.
Thank you again. Bye.
Bye.